Here the Romans built the fortress of Othona, one of the forts of the Saxon shore. A piece of the walling of this fortress is still visible. And at low tide it is possible to find fragments of Roman tile among the saltings. At this point, 3 centuries later, the effective conversion of the East Saxons began. Cedd, a monk from Lindisfarne in Northumbria, built his mission church here, probably from the material of the ruined Roman fortress. His church still stands astride its inner wall, St. Peter's on the Wall, the earliest and most precious relic of the impact of Christianity on the heathen East Saxons. From Cedd's church here, the gospel spread, and more churches were built in Essex. Some and all other Saxon timber churches throughout England have perished through decay, disaster, or replacement. All except one, the Church of St. Andrew at Greensted Juxta Ongar. The wooden nave, built of cleft logs, has stood for 1,000 years. The Lignia Capella, the little chapel of wood, where the body of St. Edmund, King of East Anglia, martyred by the Danes, rested on its return journey from London to Bury St. Edmunds in 1013. Other early churches in Essex were built of more durable material. At Colchester, the tower of Holy Trinity Church is full of reused material from the ruins of the Roman Colonia. Its triangular-headed doorway is made up entirely of Roman bricks. In time, the division of Essex into parishes was completed, and the size and richness of each parish church depended on the number, needs, and wealth of the parishioners. At Hadleigh, the Norman church is almost as it was when built in the middle of the 12th century. Just a few windows inserted later, and a bell turret added in Tudor times. Frequently, as at Great Maplestead, there was only a moderate amount of change. The form of the original Norman church is still discernible. Indeed, the apse actually unchanged. Look at the typical coursing of the Norman masons. There have been extensions, however. A south aisle and south transept were added about 1350. The transept was enlarged southwards in the 17th century. And a porch was added in Victorian times. Sometimes there was a complete transformation. Here at Thaxted, the remodeling began in the 14th century and was continued at intervals down to 1510. Externally, the craftsmanship is remarkably fine. Even the hand of the restorer, replacing decayed stonework, was restrained from vandalism. Indeed, there is light and spaciousness everywhere. It is clearly well used and well cared for. A magnificent church, the pride of Essex. In some parishes, the old church was completely destroyed and an entirely new one built. At Wanstead, the new church is Noble Georgian of 1790. Its interior is composed and lovely, with high box pews and a graceful pulpit with its sounding board supported on 2 palm tree columns. Always, whether in building a church for the first time or enlarging an existing one, the Essex masons were faced with difficulties, for there is no good building stone in the county. The building story of Samden Church is the story of an ingenious and delightful triumph of mind over matter. Here the Norman masons used anything they could find: Roman brick and tile, pudding stone, flints and pebbles, reserving the most perfect Roman bricks as quoins. The Tudor masons used brick for the handsome porch and tower, mainly mellow red brick with some vitreous bricks, to form a pattern of saltires in honour of St. Andrew, the patron saint of the church. In the northern half of Essex, a number of churches have East Anglian characteristics. At Brightlingsea, for example, the walls are faced with napped flints. In some parts of the walls, these flints are framed in freestone to form attractive inlay or flush work. In the south of the county, on the borders of the Thames, one kind of fairly good building stone was used at Prittlewell and a number of other churches. This was ragstone, quarried in Kent and easily transported across the river. In many parts of the county, timber was widely used. The most remarkable examples are those massive pagoda-like timber belfries such as Blackmore, built of oak trees from the Royal Forest of Essex. Thus, throughout Essex, parish churches show infinite variety in materials and in building story. Here is stately splendour, the soaring remodelling of Saffron Walden, using costly imported stone. Here is solid simplicity, the little church at Chignell Smealy, built entirely of local brick. Even its font is made of brick. But where should strangers to Essex go? Visitors from America, for instance, to gain an abiding memory of a parish church which is essentially Essex. One way leads to Little Baddow Church. From the crossroads, the way leads down a sunken tree-lined lane. It passes the farmhouse of Cuckoos, a birthplace of local nonconformity. Here lived Thomas Hooker and John Eliot, who emigrated to New England in 1632. Later, Eliot became famous and was known as the Apostle to the Red Indians. Past the early Congregational Chapel, built in 1708, soon after the persecution of nonconformists died down, and they were allowed to worship openly and freely. Here the road dips down towards the River Chelmer. On the one side is the 15th century hall. On the other is the church of St. Mary the Virgin. From the outside, a plain, ordinary mid-Essex church. Past the 18th century tombstones and the blocked priest's doorway. Past the blocked window to the original Norman north wall, built mainly of rubble. The quoins are made of reused Roman tiles. The north doorway, the Devil's Door, is also made of Roman bricks, for the church was probably built on a Roman site. In Richard II's time, the west tower was added. Earlier in the 14th century, the Norman nave had been widened to the south towards the sun, for the number of worshippers had grown since the church was built. Hanging from the roof of the porch is an ancient lantern, said to have been used in times of plague. The porch also has a seat made of a solid baulk of oak. Pause for a moment before entering. For generations, this porch, this parish meeting place, has been by law and tradition a parish board. A quiet, simple interior. That little window to the right of the chancel arch was made when the nave was widened southward. On an old millstone is the bowl of the ancient font, once lost for a century. Behind it is a brass inscription to a woman with an unusual name, Mercy Springham, died 1611. Eastwards, in two richly carved recesses, are the rare oaken figures of a man and a woman, beautifully carved 600 years ago. The figure of the woman is gracefully fashioned. She wears a wimple and veil, and many buttons along the sleeves of her kirtle. The head of the man is remarkably fine. See how skillfully the carver has appreciated the nature and texture of his medium. Two modern memorials recall the sacrifices of the present century. The organ is modern. Decent and comely, it blends into its ancient surroundings. The chancel is the most sacred part of the church. Here the greatest sacrifice has been commemorated through the centuries. To the north of the altar is the elaborate monument to Sir Henry Mildmay of Great Graces, with the blue lions of the Mildmays on his achievement of arms. Sir Henry's effigy reclines between two black columns. Below, his widow, Amy, and his first wife, Alice, whose ghost is said to haunt the avenue known as Grace's Walk. The interior owes much to the loving care and antiquarian skill shown by Canon Jesse Berridge during his long rectorship. Here he unblocked the rood loft stairs which led to the top of the long vanished screen dividing the nave, the place of the people, from the chancel, the place of the priest. He had the Norman north doorway unblocked to disclose the original door. He and his sons patiently stripped off the plaster to reveal the 14th century painting of St. Christopher carrying the Christ child on his shoulders as he crossed the raging river to the hermit's cell on the other side. Back at the west end are other treasures, an iron-bound chest, a bell now silent bearing the inscription Sancta Toma Ora Pro Nobis, and the foundry shield of Henry Jordan, who cast it 500 years ago with the bell and laver pot, emblems of his craft. The ground stage of the tower is used as a vestry and ringing chamber. The way to the top of the tower is not easy. A narrow spiral stairway, then one ladder, then another, between the bells, and finally a third ladder. The view is well worth the effort. the winding floodplain of the River Chelmer. Below, the roof of the nave and chancel, and the medieval and Tudor hall. Look back over nearly 9 centuries. In this simple, dignified building, raised by local craftsmen from local materials, generations of parishioners have met and worshipped. It is the spirit of ancient Essex set in the very heart and centre of the county. Look back and remember.